Welcome to the Midnight Codex, where forgotten truths breathe and shadows tell their tale. Tonight, don't blink and don't look behind you.
I never believed a place could hold a memory until I took the job at Gray Hollow Cemetery. It wasn't the kind of work people applied for willingly. I didn't answer an ad, and I certainly wasn't looking for night shifts in a graveyard. It started with a letter. No name, no return address. Just an envelope slid under my apartment door late one evening, the paper inside yellowed and brittle, written in handwriting that looked too old to belong to anyone still alive. It said simply, "Night Watch, Gray Hollow Cemetery, midnight to sunrise. Observe. Follow the rules." And below that, 5 lines, numbered but with no explanations, rules that seemed more like warnings. I should have thrown it away, burned it. But rent was overdue, my cupboards were empty, and the kind of quiet desperation that makes bad decisions had already set in. By the time I realized how strange it was, I'd already replied. I didn't even know who I was replying to. The first time I saw Gray Hollow was in the dying light of dusk. The gates rose out of the fog like black iron ribs, twisted and old, their paint peeling in jagged strips. The cemetery stretched beyond them like an endless maze, rows upon rows of leaning stones, some broken, others swallowed by the earth. Tall yew trees stood like sentinels, their branches black against a sky turning the color of bruised flesh. The air smelled damp, heavy with rot and something faintly metallic, like the taste of blood lingering at the back of my throat. I wasn't greeted. There was no manager, no handshake, just a ring of old keys hanging from the gatepost on a rusty nail, swaying slightly even though there was no wind. I took them. The gates creaked open with a sound that seemed to shiver through my bones. The ground crunched under my boots as I stepped inside, gravel mixing with patches of dead grass. My breath hung in the air, pale and ghost-like, dissolving into the cold. Every sound felt amplified. The scrape of my soles, the faint creak of tree limbs, even my own heartbeat. I made my way toward the caretaker's hut, a squat brick building with a roof that sagged under decades of moss. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and something else, something that made the hair on my neck rise, like the room itself had been sealed for years and was now reluctantly letting me in. On the desk was a single object, a leather-bound notebook, worn soft and dark with age. The first page had only a date, 1897, and beneath it, the same rules from the letter written in the same old-fashioned hand, no one's name, no signature. I read them again. Lock the gates at midnight, no exceptions. Never approach the woman in white if she stands among the graves. Do not answer if you hear your own name whispered from behind. Keep away from plot 47 after 3:15 a.m. If you see the red lantern lit, leave immediately, no matter the time. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. These weren't rules for a job. They were instructions for surviving one. By the time the clock on the wall struck 12, the cemetery had gone completely still. No wind, no rustle of leaves. Even the distant hum of the town seemed to have been swallowed. I stepped back outside to lock the gates, the keys heavy and cold in my hand. The sound of the lock clicking into place seemed too loud, echoing in the night air. When I turned back toward the rows of gravestones, the fog had thickened. Shapes shifted in it, just tricks of the eye, I told myself. But the stillness was wrong, not peaceful, expectant, like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something I couldn't see. The first hour passed slowly. I walked the narrow gravel paths, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the mist in thin, trembling lines. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the paths behind me were always empty. Then, sometime after 1, I saw her. She stood among the graves, no more than 20 yards ahead, a woman in a long white dress that seemed to glow faintly in the fog. Her head was bowed, her hair hanging like a curtain, and though she didn't move, the air around her seemed to ripple. Rule 2 screamed in my mind, never approach the woman in white. I froze. The beam of my flashlight shook in my hand, spilling light across the stones but never quite touching her. My breath turned shallow. my fingers numb. Then she lifted her head. I didn't see her face, only the outline of it, but I knew, without knowing how, that she was looking directly at me. And in that moment, every instinct I had told me to run. But my feet wouldn't move. Somewhere in the distance, a bell began to toll. It wasn't the clock in the hut. It was deeper, heavier, and each note seemed to vibrate in my chest. The woman's head tilted slightly, almost curious. Then she smiled. The bell's last echo faded into the fog, leaving the night even quieter than before. My legs finally responded, jerking me backward, one slow step at a time. The woman in white didn't move. She just stood there, framed between two leaning headstones, as if she had been rooted into the soil for centuries. I could feel my pulse in my teeth, every beat loud, heavy, and uneven. I didn't turn my back on her until I reached the fork in the path that led toward the caretaker's hut. Even then, I risked one glance over my shoulder. The space where she had stood was empty, just fog and shadow swallowing everything. Inside the hut, the air felt heavier than before, almost suffocating. The notebook still lay open on the desk. The rules stared back at me, black ink on yellowed paper. I traced the edge of the page with my finger, as if touching the words would make them feel less absurd. But now they weren't absurd. They were the only thing standing between me and something I didn't understand. I told myself to stay put, lock the door, wait out the night, but the silence pressed in, making the room feel too small, the air too stale. My skin prickled with the sense that I wasn't alone, that if I stayed in one place too long, something would find me. So I stepped back outside. The fog had thickened, swallowing the edges of the path. My flashlight's beam stretched barely 10 feet before dissolving. Every gravestone loomed like a pale face watching me pass. The air was colder now, sharp in my lungs, carrying a faint scent I couldn't place. Damp earth mixed with something sweet, almost floral, but rotting underneath. I checked my watch. 2:37 a.m., hours to go. It was somewhere between the north and east sections that I first heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, keeping pace with mine, but just far enough back that when I stopped, they stopped too. My hand tightened on the flashlight, and I swung the beam behind me. Nothing but the shifting curtain of fog. Then came the whisper. My name. Drawn out, as if whoever, or whatever, said it was savoring each syllable. Rule 3 clawed its way to the front of my mind. Do not answer if you hear your own name whispered from behind. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached, forcing myself to keep walking. The voice followed, weaving through the mist, always behind me but never closer. It shifted tone, male, then female, then something else entirely, something too deep, too broken to belong to a human throat. I didn't realize I'd been gripping the flashlight so tightly until my knuckles throbbed. The path curved toward the eastern gate, and that's when I saw the faint glow, dull at first, then pulsing, like it was breathing. A lantern, red, hanging from a crooked iron post by the gate. Rule 5. If you see the red lantern lit, leave immediately, no matter the time. But leaving wasn't an option. The gate was locked, and beyond it was nothing but the road back to town, miles of empty asphalt. I should have turned and gone the other way, but the glow pulled at me, steady and hypnotic. I stepped closer, the fog parting in reluctant swirls. The lantern's glass was cracked, its frame rusted, but the flame inside burned with an impossible steadiness, untouched by wind or cold. The light wasn't just red. It was the color of raw muscle, deep and wet. A shadow moved in the fog just beyond the lantern, tall, too tall. Its outline stretched unnaturally, bending at strange angles as if its bones weren't fixed in place. I stumbled back, my heel catching on a loose stone. The shadow froze, then straightened, and for one terrible second, I thought it would come closer. But instead, the lantern's flame flickered once and went out. The darkness that followed wasn't natural. It felt thick, almost liquid, clinging to my skin, seeping into my clothes. I fumbled with the flashlight, and when the beam finally cut through, the post was empty. No lantern, no shadow, only the whisper. Closer now, I turned and ran. My breath tore at my throat, my boots pounding the gravel. The fog seemed to twist around me, turning familiar paths into endless loops. Gravestones blurred past in the corner of my vision, their names unreadable in the mist. When I burst back into the caretaker's hut, I slammed the door and locked it, my lungs burning, ears straining for any sound outside. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, faintly, 3 knocks on the door, slow, even. I didn't move. The knocks came again, and then a voice. Not whispered this time, spoken, low, calm. It was my mother's voice. The wind had grown colder. It wasn't just the kind of cold that made your skin prickle. It seeped through the fabric of my coat into my bones, curling in my gut like something alive. The graveyard had a way of swallowing warmth, as if the earth itself was greedy for heat, greedy for life. I tightened my scarf, forcing my breath into steady clouds, watching them vanish as quickly as they formed. The lantern in my hand swayed gently, casting thin, shaking lines of light across crooked headstones. Every few steps, my foot caught on something. Roots, uneven earth, maybe worse. It was like the ground didn't want me here. That night felt wrong. Not just quiet, wrong. There was a weight pressing on the air, a hush so absolute it made me wonder if sound itself had been stolen. My boots crunched softly against the frozen soil, but even that seemed swallowed, muted by the dark. I passed by the old angel statue, the one with its face eroded smooth by time. I'd seen it before, but tonight, its head was tilted, just slightly. The wings loomed over me in shadow, and I could have sworn the hollow sockets where eyes should be were watching. My pace quickened before my brain had the courage to admit why. Somewhere deeper in the graveyard, a sound broke the stillness. A faint rhythmic scrape, metal against stone, slow, deliberate. I froze. It came again, and again. I turned toward it, each step heavier than the last. The sound seemed to pull me, as though the night itself wanted me to see. My breath caught when I reached the far corner of the grounds. There, leaning over a headstone, was a figure. Tall, shoulders hunched, hands working some old iron chain tangled in the earth. His movements were methodical, slow, and there was a strange grace to the way he worked, like every action had been done 100 times before. Richard? The name left my lips before I realized I'd spoken. The man looked up. His face caught the lantern light for just a second, pale, lined, and unmistakably human, but wrong. His eyes were too dark, swallowing the light rather than reflecting it, and his mouth didn't move when he spoke. "You're late." The voice came from somewhere, around me, not from him. It was like hearing a thought I didn't own. I gripped the lantern tighter. "What are you doing here?" My words shook more than I wanted. He didn't answer, at least not directly. His hands kept working the chain until it came loose from the dirt, revealing something beneath. Not a coffin, not a grave marker, just a slab of stone, old and cracked, etched with symbols I didn't recognize. They seemed to writhe in the shifting light. "This isn't your shift," Richard finally said, straightening slowly. "You shouldn't be here tonight." "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering, he stepped closer, his boots silent on the frost. For a moment, I thought I could see my own reflection in his eyes, but it wasn't moving like I was. It stood still, staring back at me. A sharp breath escaped my throat, and I took a step back. My heel struck the base of another headstone, and my lantern's flame jumped, throwing long shadows across the graves. Richard stopped, head tilting just slightly, like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. "You hear them now, don't you?" he asked. And I did. Whispers. So faint they could have been the wind, but layered, dozens of them. Voices that didn't belong to the living, brushing the edges of my mind. I couldn't make out words, only the urgency, the hunger. Richard's gaze drifted past me toward the heart of the graveyard. His expression didn't change, but the air seemed to grow colder around him. "They're awake tonight." "Who?" I asked, though part of me didn't want the answer. He didn't give me one. Instead, he looked back at the slab he'd uncovered. "When the bell tolls," he murmured, "you stay away from this place. no matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name. The wind picked up suddenly, cutting through me like glass. Somewhere far off, I thought I heard the faintest chime, just one note, clear and hollow, hanging in the air far too long. I blinked, and Richard was gone. No footsteps, no sound of movement, just the chain lying in the dirt, coiled like something that had been alive a moment ago. My chest felt tight, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The whispers had faded, but the silence that replaced them was worse. I backed away slowly, lantern trembling in my hand, until I was certain the statue, the graves, and the empty ground between them were exactly as they had been. But they weren't. I knew it. That's when I noticed something carved into the slab's surface, just visible in the dying light. My name. The cold from the stone seeped into my fingers as I traced the letters of my name. The grooves felt deeper than they should have been, like they had been carved not with a chisel, but with time itself, years, decades, maybe longer. My breath clouded in the air, drifting upward into the mist, and for a moment, it was the only thing moving in the world. Richard was gone. Just gone. 1 second he was standing beside me, his flashlight beam trembling over the moss-covered graves, and the next, there was only emptiness where he'd been. No sound of footsteps, no rustle of fabric, nothing. The bell tolled again, low, hollow. It carried through the fog like it was underwater, pulling something behind it. My chest tightened, a sensation not unlike being dragged forward by an unseen hand. I backed away from the stone, my boots crunching over brittle leaves, each step somehow too loud in the silence. I wanted to call out for Richard, but my throat felt locked, as if saying his name would invite something I didn't want to see. Then, the temperature dropped. Not the kind you feel when a wind picks up, but a suffocating stillness, the air pressing cold into my skin from all sides. My ears popped like the pressure had shifted. And in that pressure, a sound. Soft at first, a wet scraping, like something dragging over damp earth. It came from behind one of the larger tombs, the one with a cracked angel statue leaning sideways as if about to fall. I told myself to turn back toward the gate. Just leave. Whatever Richard had gotten himself into, it wasn't worth it. But then the scraping stopped, and a voice, low, female, slid through the fog. Ethan, I froze. My mother's voice. It couldn't be. She'd been dead for years, buried in a cemetery 3 towns over. I knew it wasn't her, but my body didn't care about logic. My legs carried me toward the sound, the beam of my flashlight shaking in my hand. The light cut through the mist in thin ribbons, and each time I passed between graves, the shadows seemed to cling to the edges a moment too long. I turned the corner around the angel statue, and there she was, standing in front of another gravestone, her back to me. The same dark coat she used to wear, the same careful way she held her hands clasped in front of her. I couldn't see her face, but I didn't need to. My chest ached with a strange pull, half grief, half dread. "Mom," the word barely made it past my lips. She didn't turn. Instead, she began to walk, not hurried, not slow, just steady, her steps making no sound on the frost-bitten grass. I followed, even though every instinct screamed at me to stop. She moved between the graves as if she knew every path, every twist. The fog thickened the farther we went, and soon I realized I'd lost all sense of direction. The bell was still tolling somewhere behind us, but it was fainter now, as if I were being led deeper into another place entirely. We stopped before a mausoleum. Its stone door was ajar, just enough for darkness to seep out. She stepped inside without hesitation. I hesitated only a heartbeat before following, because if I didn't, I knew I'd lose her forever. The air inside was damp, heavy with the smell of earth and rot. My flashlight flickered, the beam cutting briefly across shelves of stone coffins, their surfaces cracked and slick with moisture. Something moved in the corner of my vision, quick, small, like a shadow darting just out of reach. "Mom," I said again, louder this time. My voice echoed, too loud in the ee-hee, confined space. She stopped in front of a coffin at the far end of the room. Her hands, pale and trembling, reached out and rested on the stone lid. And then she turned. It wasn't my mother's face. It was mine. Pale, bloodless, eyes hollow and dark like two burned-out stars. Her mouth, my mouth, opened, and a voice that was not mine spilled out, layered and broken. "You don't belong here." I stumbled back, hitting the wall hard enough to rattle my teeth. The coffin lid slid open with a slow, grinding sound. Inside was nothing but dirt. Black, wet dirt. The smell hit me like a wave, and something inside began to shift. A hand, thin, bony, pushed through, clawing at the edge. Another followed. I bolted. Out of the mausoleum, through the graves, my flashlight swinging wildly and catching glimpses of shapes moving in the mist. Too tall, too twisted to be human. The bell was louder now, each toll sharp, pulling me toward the gate. I didn't stop until the rusted iron bars were in sight. I shoved them open, slipped through, and slammed them shut with a clang that echoed through the fog. My breath came in ragged bursts, my chest burning, and that's when I saw it, through the cabin window just a few yards away. A single, wet handprint, pressed flat against the inside of the glass. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Even from here, I could see the water dripping down from each finger, running in thin, deliberate lines. The condensation around it had already vanished, like something was still there, pressing against it from the other side. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. The handprint on the window was the first thing I saw every time I blinked. It wasn't fading. If anything, the condensation around it had vanished, as if the glass itself was warmer there, like something still pressed against it from the other side. I stayed in the chair by the door, poker across my lap, flashlight on the desk. The silence was worse than the humming. At least the humming meant I knew where it was. Now it could be anywhere. The old clock above the stove ticked toward 3 a.m., each sound sharp and wet, like the hands were slicing into the air. My skin prickled. I realized I could hear something beneath the ticking. A faint scrape. Not at the window this time. Beneath me. The floorboards were trembling ever so slightly under my boots, like something was shifting in the ground beneath the hut. I leaned forward, holding my breath, listening. The scrape grew louder, followed by a dull, rhythmic thud. Someone. Digging. The thought snapped cold through me. The hut sat near the oldest section of the cemetery. If someone, or something, was tunneling up. The thud stopped. The silence came back thicker than before. Then, 3 knocks on the door. They weren't urgent. They weren't testing. They were patient, waiting. Rule 6. If someone knocks after 2 a.m., you're the only one who hears it. My hand tightened around, the poker, until the metal bit into my skin. I didn't answer. The knocks came again, and with them, a voice. It was my mother's. "Ethan, open the door. It's cold out here." My throat locked. My mother had been dead for 8 years, buried 3 towns over. I'd chosen the coffin myself. "I know you're in there." Her voice was soft, coaxing. "You left me alone. That wasn't fair. Let me in." Every instinct screamed to move away from the door, but my legs stayed rooted. There was something in her tone, something that curled around the edges of my thoughts, pulling me toward her. I stepped closer until my forehead nearly touched the wood. "Just one moment," she said. "I've brought you something. From home." My fingers brushed the lock. Cold shot up my arm, and then I remembered. Her voice didn't sound exactly right. The pitch was just a fraction too low, the pauses between words a little too long, like whoever was speaking was trying to remember how humans sounded. I stepped back, shaking my head. "You're not her." Silence. Then the voice changed. It was mine. Perfectly mine. "Ethan," it said, "let me in. You know you can't do this alone." Something slammed against the door, hard enough to rattle the frame. Dust rained from the ceiling. The poker felt useless now. Whatever was outside didn't need to pick the lock. It could tear the door apart if it wanted. And then, nothing. No knocks, no voice. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. The handprint was still on the glass, but there was no shadow behind it anymore. Finally, I moved to the window, careful to stay just out of sight. The moonlight painted the graveyard silver and black, each headstone casting a long shadow. At first, nothing moved. Then, between two tall monuments, I saw me. Or rather, a perfect copy of me, standing still facing the hut. Its posture was wrong, too rigid, arms hanging straight at its sides. Even from this distance I could see its eyes. They weren't mine. They glowed faintly red, like embers smoldering in a dying fire. It tilted its head slowly, almost curiously. Then it smiled. The smile didn't stop. It stretched wider, skin pulling taut until it split at the corners, and then the double turned and walked toward the mausoleum. I should have stayed inside, locked the door, waited for dawn. But some part of me knew, if that thing went back to the mausoleum, whatever it was bringing with it would be worse. The cold hit me like a wall as soon as I stepped outside. The air smelled of earth and something sweet, faint but wrong, like flowers left too long in a vase. Frost crunched under my boots as I followed. The mausoleum door was open again. Inside, candles I hadn't seen before burned with a strange green flame, casting the walls in sickly light. Shadows twisted and swayed, though nothing seemed to move them. My double stood at the far end, facing the back wall. As I stepped inside, it slowly turned. Up close, the differences were clearer. The skin was too smooth, as if it had never aged. The hands were clean, nails perfect, but the fingers were longer than they should be. And those ember eyes, they didn't blink. "You're not supposed to be here," it said in my voice. The words didn't echo properly. They slid through the air, flat and heavy. "What are you?" I asked. It smiled again. "You. When you stop pretending." Something moved in the shadows behind it, the tall shapes from before, their red eyes glowing, swaying in time with the low hum that had returned. So quiet, I almost didn't notice it at first. "You should have let her in," it said, tilting its head toward the door. "She misses you." I buried her. The smile widened. "We can dig her up." The hum grew louder. My chest felt tight, my vision narrowing. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body felt like it was sinking into the stone floor. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard a sharp metallic clang. The spell broke just enough for me to move. I bolted from the mausoleum, the hum chasing me out into the cold. I didn't stop until I was back in the hut, slamming the door, bolting it and shoving the desk in front for good measure. Outside, the hum faded, but I could still hear my own voice whispering from the other side of the door. The colorless light never made it to dawn. It hung there like the idea of morning, thin and stubborn over the stones, and the cemetery held its breath with me, as if the whole place were waiting for a cue I couldn't hear. I kept the poker across my lap. The notebook lay open under my palm. The paper felt cool as metal. The hours tilted and rolled with the second-hand stutter. When the wind finally dragged a narrow note along the eaves, the sound had the careful touch of a fingernail on glass. Polite, patient, warning. Somewhere in the fog, a bell that is not a bell was touched rather than rung. The graveyard answered by settling deeper on its foundations. The handprint on the window had dried to perfect clarity. The longer I looked at it, the more it looked back. The clock paused on 3:12 and skipped ahead a breath. The number 3 felt heavier than any other. The space after it carried the taste of pennies. Rule 4 glowed in my head. Keep away from plot 47 after 3:15 a.m. The more I tried to stay still, the more the rule worked on me like a hook in muscle. The page I hadn't written on seemed to breathe again. A slow swell under my hand. Something in this place wanted me to wait. Something older wanted me to go. The hum did not return, but the silence learned its shape and wore it like clothing. Then the red arrived. Not the lantern itself at first, only its color, a soft pulse moving through the fog as if the mist had learned to blush. It bled along the path from the east and pooled against the hut's door jamb in a thin seam of light before withdrawing like a tide that had changed its mind. I opened the door. The air bit deeper than cold. It carried that wrong sweetness, rotted flowers in a sealed room, sugar gone sour. Beneath it, a mineral tang that primed the gums. The lantern burned on the far path where I could swear no post had stood the night before. The glass was cracked, the frame warped, but the flame inside held a steady color like raw muscle, wet and working. It didn't flicker. It didn't need to. It simply was. The fog leaned away from it the way grass leans from fire. The light did not paint the graves, it named them. The names I could never read in mist rose legible, as if the letters themselves were warmed into visibility. I should have turned my back. I didn't. The lantern lifted its color and set it down again farther along. My boots found the places the color had warmed, past the yews that stood like black ribs, past the stones that leaned like exhausted shoulders. The path narrowed into a corridor of frost-burnt grass. The smell of damp iron thickened until I could have chewed it. The lantern came to rest at a bend in the path I had never noticed. On the other side, the cemetery fell into an older geometry. Stones shorter and nearer. Markers so eroded their faces had melted back into the earth, iron rails eaten to lace. In the center, lower than the ground around it, as if the soil were tired of holding it up, sat a single slab. No angel, no cross, only stone with a number bitten sharp into the edge, 47. The rest of the inscription was shallow, as though the carver had been interrupted, or the stone had decided not to keep what it was given. The wind, or the thing that wore its voice, took a slow breath under the hill and let it go. The red lantern steadied. The second hand on my wrist surrendered one tick, then another, until it trembled on the border between 3:14 and the minute the rules feared. I stopped at the lip of the plot. The grass here had the color of old photographs. When my boot pressed it, it lay down and did not rise. A hairline crack ran the length of the slab, filled with soil as fine as flour. In that seam, something moved, not an insect, not a root, something like the skin of the earth remembering how to ripple. My double stood to the left as if he had been waiting all along in the angle my sight could not comfortably hold. No frost touched him, no breath left his mouth. Those ember eyes looked smaller in the weak light, and deeper, like coals tucked beneath ash. The smile hadn't learned a new shape. It hadn't needed to. It simply divided the face into what it wanted to keep and what it could spare. On the right, past a fence so eaten you could look at it and catch tetanus, my mother's figure lingered as if the fog had been taught to wear her. She did not come closer. She did not need to. The space between us did the work for her. "You're on time," my voice said from the left, pleased without warmth. The lantern made the teeth look wet. I watched the second hand tremble and thought, wildly, that if I could hold it there by will, the grave would never open. The second hand did not belong to me. The minute came. 3:15. The ground exhaled. It didn't collapse. It sighed. The soil around the slab loosened like fingers uncurling. The crack widened by the breadth of a fingernail and stopped. From that new slit rose a smell my throat tried not to learn. Syrupy rot, soft wood, a bandage left too long. The red lantern did not dim. It leaned, almost imperceptibly, so that its color ran into the slit like a poured thing. Rule 4 said, "Keep away." But rules here had always been written to keep you alive by inches. I understood, with the clarity of a blade, that keeping away would only make the opening patient. I had been running this whole time. There's only so long a thing like this will chase before it teaches you to turn. "Choose," my voice said again. Not loud, not kind. It didn't point at my mother this time. It pointed at the slab. My mouth tasted like batteries. My fist remembered the weight of the poker and tightened. I did not speak. I did something simpler, and worse. I stopped breathing. It wasn't dramatic. No gasp, no oath. I closed my mouth, let the last cold fill of air sit where it sat, and refused to trade. The body does not like to be asked for this. The chest lifted and failed to rise. The throat made a small animal noise. Vision learned to black at the corners, and in the instant the breath left the world, I heard the cemetery. Not the hum, not the wind, the breathing. Stones hold heat and release it. Trees move water, soil swells and shrinks with damp and cold. The place had a rhythm, and I had been keeping pace without knowing it. When I stopped, the rhythm stumbled. The red lantern's flame contracted a hair. The slit in the stone held still, as if listening. My double swayed, so slightly that a blind eye would have missed it. The ember eyes guttered to a duller red. 10 seconds, 15, 20. The body begged, I begged back. The part of the brain that chews on survival bared its teeth, and I showed it mine. The world narrowed to the taste of metal and the hiss of blood in the skull. The lantern pinched again. In that small starving of light, the grave seam gave its breath back and closed the width of a hair. Breathe, my voice suggested, almost amused. If you want to be you. I counted. Not numbers, names. Names of stones I had read. Names of rules I had obeyed. Names of hours I had bought with fear. The notebook page under my palm at the desk. The sentence I had not dared to write. If the cemetery breathes, do not. At 30, the body threw a fist at the inside of the ribs. I ignored it and stepped onto the slab. It accepted my weight the way a table accepts a glass set down decisively. No complaint, only knowledge. The crack widened again, not down, but around, as if it had circled to taste the new pressure. I put my boot heel in the seam and leaned. The stone made a sound like wet paper torn carefully. The lantern went small and mean, and then held. My double moved as if pulled by a string that didn't like being seen. My mother lifted her chin the tiniest degree. Ink-colored tears ran from eyes that were not eyes at all. 40 seconds. The body panicked and went oddly quiet, as if the animal had understood it wasn't being heard and folded its complaints into a plan for later. The grave made a soft sound from below, a hollow knock, as if wood were learning a knuckle. The minute hand ticked and became an accusation. "You're not supposed to know that trick," my voice said, mild. A teacher surprised and faintly approving. I tried to think of nothing at all. The world behaved like a room whose occupant had left. Same furniture, different temperature. Then, the pressure under my boot changed from stone to something that remembered giving. The slab listed a fraction. The seam widened enough to show a darkness that wasn't absence, but presence. A black with grain in it. The smell rose hot and thick. My lungs spasmed and lost. I let the breath out. I didn't take another. The exhale left me quiet enough that the cemetery believed me. In that quiet, the stone shifted wrong and then right, and then stopped altogether. The red lantern drew itself into a thread, like a flame seen between fingers pinched almost shut. My double blinked. The ember went out and came back smaller. The mouth corrected its smile and worried at the new shape like a bad habit it could not quite enjoy. "Enough," said a new voice from behind me. Not my mother, not me. Tired, human. I turned, not trusting the turn, and found Richard at the edge of the old geometry with his hat in one hand and a shovel in the other. He looked smaller outdoors than when I first saw him, like the cemetery kept a portion of his height in escrow. Frost rimed his coat. His eyes were the color of wet bark. "You'll crack it instead of closing it," he said, nodding at my boot on the slab. "And when it cracks, it doesn't open down. It opens out." "What is it?" I asked. I knew he wouldn't answer cleanly. "A door that forgot which way is through," he said. The shovel's blade tapped the stone once. A polite kiss, like the sound I'd heard in the mausoleum. "Rule 4 keeps fools from lifting it. Fools lift. The wise learn the hour and starve it." "I can't hold it," I said. It wasn't entirely true. I could. But the edges of the world had grown soft. "You already did." He looked past me into the fog where my mother waited and did not wait. "You ought not to look at her. Memory is a hook, and you have very soft meat." He set the shovel down, stepped to the lantern, and breathed on it the way you blow out a birthday candle to make a wish small. The red died as if embarrassed to be seen. Darkness returned. Kind as darkness knows how to be. When I stepped off the stone, the crack side shut a fraction. The smell folded back into the seam like a hand withdrawn under a sheet. Richard didn't offer me his arm. He did not need to. We walked together to the hut in the light that refused to be dawn. My double kept pace at the edge of seeing, and then was not there. My mother's figure thinned the way fog thins when the road widens and nothing stands up to hold it. Inside, he stood at the desk and turned the notebook to a fresh page that was not fresh at all. It carried the faint impress of letters written hard on the sheet above. He set the tip of a pen I hadn't seen him take from anywhere against the paper. The ink seemed to arrive before the nib. He did not write a rule. He wrote a number. 6. Beneath it, if you stay beyond it, the cemetery chooses a better you. Better? I said, the word ugly in my mouth. Obedient, he said. He closed the book and slid it toward me. The poker on the desk had left a cold rectangle on the leather. Another night or two, and it will start writing in your hand while you sleep. Don't let it learn your rhythm. Folks think it wants blood. Blood is only a way to keep time. I thought of the breath I'd kept, the way the lantern pinched, the hum wearing the room, the floor tunneling patiently toward my chair. What happens if I leave now? He smiled without humor. Leave means leave. Don't look back. Don't drive past the gate to prove you can. Don't check the obituary page for yourself. Don't listen when the phone rings and calls you by a name you loved. You leave or you stay. Men fail because they try to do both. And if I stay? He put the pen away in a pocket I would have sworn he didn't have. Then you learn the rest of the rules, and the rules learn you. Sometimes that works. Mostly it writes a better you, like I said. He went to the door. Before he opened it, he looked at the window, at the perfect, dry handprint. He lifted his own palm and held it an inch from the glass. For a heartbeat, the frost between skin and pain feathered outward, as if something on the other side had leaned in to meet him halfway. He lowered his hand. The print did not change. Dawn in an hour, he said, which sounded like a promise and a threat. Plot 47 won't breathe again tonight. That was yours. Don't spend it like spare change. When he left, the room did not feel empty. It felt like a mouth closed on a word it would not speak. I sat with the poker and the book, and the smell of iron and flowers beginning to peel away from the air. When I opened to the last written page, I found a line I had not seen him write. It was in my hand, not his, my slant, my pressure, my habit of crossing the T too far to the right. If the cemetery breathes, do not. If it learns your breath, teach it silence. The clock coughed itself to 3:59 and stalled as if shy. Outside, the fog, thinned in sheets, tearing itself into flags between the stones. I watched the minute hand consider 4 and wondered whether it would arrive with me in the room or without me at all. Somewhere under the floor, very far away and very near, something the size of a hand brushed the underside of the boards in a slow, deliberate stroke, as if reminding me gently that tunnels finish what they start. I laid my palm flat on the plank and felt, through wood and cold, the faintest answering pause, the closest this place comes to listening. And when the gray finally brightened by a fraction no human eye should bother measuring, the red lantern, wherever it had gone, found a way to shine once more. Not out on the path, not by the gate. In the glass of the hut's window, a reflection with no source, a small, patient coal that waited until I noticed. Then it pulsed once, like a heartbeat, as if to say, tonight was only a lesson. The choosing comes after.